On January 12, 2026, Apple did something it almost never does. It admitted failure. The company announced a $1 billion per year deal with Google, its biggest rival, to completely rebuild Siri using Google's Gemini AI. This launches in March, which means it's happening right now. Joining me to break this down is Jordan, a tech analyst who spent years working on Apple products. Jordan, welcome.
Thanks, Alex. This has been fascinating to watch unfold.
So let's start with the headline. Apple is paying Google $1 billion per year for Siri. Why?
Because after 15 years, Apple finally admitted what everyone already knew. Siri is terrible, and they can't fix it themselves.
That's a pretty brutal assessment.
It's accurate. Look at what they announced. They're replacing Siri's brain with Google's Gemini 2.5 Pro, a 1.2 trillion parameter model. That's 8 times larger than what Apple was using for Apple Intelligence. They're not tweaking Siri, they're gutting it and putting Google's engine inside.
And they're launching this in March 2026, that's this month.
iOS 26.4 is expected in late March, early April. This isn't vaporware, this is imminent.
Okay, so Siri has been around since 2011, that's 15 years. Why couldn't Apple make it work?
Siri was groundbreaking when it launched, but Apple never iterated fast enough. They treated it like a hardware problem, ship it, refine it slowly. Meanwhile, Google was treating Assistant like a services problem, continuous improvement, massive data feedback loops.
So Google got better faster.
Google had fundamental advantages. They have search. Every query people make on Google trains their AI. Apple doesn't have that data pipeline. Siri only knows what Siri users ask, and Siri users, they stopped asking after they got frustrated.
Vicious cycle.
Exactly. And then ChatGPT launched in late 2022. Suddenly, the bar for what people expected from AI shut up overnight. Siri went from mediocre but acceptable to embarrassingly behind.
What did Apple try to do about it?
They tried building their own large language models. They announced Apple Intelligence in 2024. But here's the problem. Building state-of-the-art AI requires 3 things: data, compute, and talent. Google has all 3 at scale. Apple has compute and money, but they were bleeding AI talent.
Where was the talent going?
Everywhere. OpenAI, Anthropic, Google. There's reports of engineers leaving Apple for 200 million plus compensation packages at these AI labs. Apple couldn't match that. They're a hardware company with hardware compensation structures.
So they lost the people who could build this.
They lost the people, they didn't have the data, and even with unlimited compute, you can't catch up to Google or OpenAI if you're starting 3 years behind. At some point, Tim Cook had to make a call. Keep trying and fail, or partner and compete.
And he chose partnership.
He chose survival.
Let's talk about what Apple actually announced. Walk me through the deal structure.
So on January 12th, Apple and Google released a joint statement. Very unusual. It said Apple would use Google's Gemini models and cloud technology as the foundation for next-generation Apple Intelligence, including a more personalized Siri coming this year.
And the $1 billion number?
That came from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman. He reported Apple would pay approximately $1 billion per year for access to a custom Gemini model. Apple and Google haven't confirmed the exact number publicly, but nobody's denied it either.
What does $1 billion buy you?
Access to Gemini 2.5 Pro, customized for Apple's use case. This isn't the public Gemini. It's a version Google built specifically to handle Siri summarization and planning functions. It's optimized for the kinds of tasks Siri does most: understanding context, maintaining conversation threads, executing multi-step requests.
And this is 1.2 trillion parameters?
Correct. To put that in perspective, the model Apple was using for cloud-based Apple Intelligence features had 150 billion parameters. This is an 8-fold increase in model size and capability.
That's massive.
It's a generational leap, and it reveals just how far behind Apple was. They weren't even in the same magnitude class.
So here's the thing that everyone's asking. Apple's brand is privacy. Google's brand is not privacy. How does this work?
This is the billion-dollar question. Literally. Apple's solution is something called Private Cloud Compute, or PCC.
Explain how that works.
Think of it like this. Google's Gemini model will run, but it runs on Apple servers, not Google's. Apple has built a secure server system powered by Apple Silicon that acts as a buffer between you and Google's AI.
So the AI is Google's, but the hardware is Apple's.
Exactly. And Apple claims that Siri interactions sent to Gemini are anonymized, never stored, and never used to train Google's future models.
Do you believe that?
I believe Apple believes it. They've built technical architecture to make it true, but there's a gap between technical capability and operational reality.
What do you mean?
In February, Google CEO Sundar Pichai referred to Google as Apple's preferred cloud provider. That raised eyebrows, because if advanced Siri features bypass Apple's PCC and run directly on Google's TPU-powered hardware for maximum performance, then the privacy guarantees get murky.
So there's a tension between performance and privacy.
Always. The more you optimize for performance, the more tempting it is to let Google run inference on their own infrastructure. And even if Apple maintains the technical boundaries, Siri will inherit Google's biases, Google's safety filters, Google's worldview. You're outsourcing the cognitive framework of your device to a third party.
That's a big shift for Apple.
It's unprecedented. Apple has always controlled the full stack: hardware, software, services. This is the first time they've handed the brain of a core experience to someone else.
If you're an iPhone user listening to this, I want to hear from you. Are you excited about Siri finally getting better? Or are you concerned about Google being inside your phone? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you're finding this breakdown valuable, hit subscribe. This is the Read AI, where we cover the tech stories that are actually reshaping the products you use every day. Share this with someone who's frustrated with Siri, because in about a month, Siri is going to be very different. All right, Jordan, let's talk about what this new Siri can actually do. So iOS 26.4 is coming in late March. What will the new Siri actually be able to do that the old one couldn't?
The first big feature is screen awareness. Siri will be able to see and understand content across all apps in real time.
What does that mean in practice?
You're looking at a restaurant on Maps, you can say, "Make a reservation," without specifying which restaurant. Siri sees your screen, knows what you're looking at, and books it. Or you get a text with an address. You can say, "Give me directions there," and Siri knows what "there" means.
So it's context-aware across the entire OS.
For the first time, yes, and it has a 128,000 token context window, expandable to 1 million for specific tasks. That means it can maintain memory of a conversation across weeks of interactions. That's actually impressive. It's what Siri should have been 5 years ago, but better late than never.
What else?
Response times under 0.5 seconds. That effectively removes the lag that's plagued voice assistants for decades. And it uses a hybrid routing system. Simple requests stay on device, complex ones go to the cloud. Only the most demanding leverage the full Gemini model.
So it's smart about when to use the big model.
That's the idea. Battery efficiency matters, latency matters, privacy matters. So you don't send everything to the cloud. You route intelligently based on complexity.
Okay, what about the agentic stuff? I've heard Siri 2.0 will be able to do tasks autonomously.
That's coming in iOS 27, expected September 2026. That's when Siri becomes proactive, automatically rebooking a canceled flight, notifying contacts based on your calendar urgency, that kind of thing. The March release is Smarter Siri, the September release is Autonomous Siri.
So this is a two-phase rollout.
Exactly. Get the foundation right in spring, then layer on autonomy in fall.
So Apple already had a deal with OpenAI to integrate Siri into ChatGPT. What happens to that?
Great question. Apple told CNBC they're making no changes to the OpenAI agreement, but reading between the lines, ChatGPT is getting demoted.
How so?
ChatGPT currently handles complicated queries that tap into the AI model's world knowledge, but with Gemini handling core Apple intelligence features, summarization, planning, Siri's query understanding, ChatGPT becomes peripheral.
So it's still there, but it's not the main engine.
Right. Think of it like this. Gemini is the default brain. ChatGPT is the backup you can explicitly invoke if you want a different perspective. But most users will never know ChatGPT is still an option.
That's gotta sting for OpenAI.
Losing default integration across 2 billion Apple devices? That's a massive strategic setback. OpenAI was positioning itself as the AI layer for consumer devices. Now Google has that position.
Why did Apple choose Google over OpenAI?
According to reports, Apple evaluated OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google. They chose Google for 2 reasons: technical capability and legal environment.
Legal environment?
Google just won a major antitrust case that could have forced them to divest Chrome. The judge ruled against that worst-case scenario, so Google can continue making deals like this with Apple. There was less regulatory risk with OpenAI or Microsoft. So this was partly a hedge against antitrust concerns?
Everything Apple does at this scale is multidimensional. Performance, privacy, legal risk, competitive dynamics, they don't make $1 billion decisions lightly.
This isn't Apple's first big deal with Google, right?
Not even close. Google already pays Apple around $20 billion per year to be the default search engine on Safari.
20 billion?
20 billion. That's been going on for years. It's one of Apple's largest revenue streams that doesn't come from selling hardware.
So this $1 billion AI deal is actually small by comparison.
In dollar terms, yes, but strategically, it's bigger. Search is a commodity. Apple could switch to Bing or DuckDuckGo tomorrow if they wanted. Users wouldn't care that much.
But Siri is different.
Siri is core identity. It's the voice of your phone. It's how you interact with the device when your hands are full. If Siri sucks, your iPhone experience sucks. Apple can't afford to compromise there.
So even though it's only $1 billion compared to $20 billion for search, it's actually a more significant relationship.
Much more significant because it's about capability, not just placement. Google isn't paying to be visible. Apple is paying because they need Google's technology to compete.
That's a power shift.
That's exactly what it is.
Let's talk about Google's side of this. What do they get out of the deal?
Validation and reach. Gemini becomes the default AI engine across both Android and iOS. That's billions of mobile users worldwide.
So they win the platform war?
They win the AI platform war, yes. OpenAI has ChatGPT, Anthropic has Claude, but Google has Gemini running on virtually every smartphone on Earth. That's an insurmountable advantage.
What else?
Data. Even if Apple's privacy controls work perfectly, Google still gets aggregate insights. They see what kinds of queries Siri users make, what patterns emerge, what works and what doesn't. That feeds back into improving Gemini.
So even anonymized, there's value.
Massive value. Understanding how billions of people interact with AI in the real world is worth more than the $1 billion Apple is paying. This is a strategic win disguised as a vendor relationship.
What about the preferred cloud provider thing Pichai mentioned?
That's interesting. During Google's earnings call, Pichai and CBO Philip Schindler both used a phrase, preferred cloud provider. Some people interpreted that as Google hosting Siri on Google Cloud, which would contradict Apple's privacy claims.
Is that what's happening?
Probably not literally, but I think Google is positioning themselves as the infrastructure layer beneath Apple services. iCloud already runs partly on Google Cloud. Now Apple Intelligence and Siri do too, in some form. Google is becoming the foundation Apple builds on.
And that's valuable even if they don't get user data?
Extremely valuable because it makes Apple dependent. Every year, this relationship gets harder to unwind. Apple's users expect a certain level of AI capability. If Apple tries to switch to a different provider, they'd risk a step backward in performance. Google knows that.
One thing I haven't heard you mention yet is what happens when Siri gets something wrong?
That's the hallucination hurdle, and it's a big one.
Explain.
Algorithms hallucinate. They confidently state things that aren't true. When you're using ChatGPT for research, that's annoying. When Siri has access to your messages, your calendar, your email, and it hallucinates while trying to help, that's dangerous.
What's the worst-case scenario?
Siri automatically cancels the wrong meeting because it misunderstood your calendar, or it books a flight to the wrong city because it hallucinated a detail from your email. These aren't hypothetical. AI agents make these mistakes today.
How is Apple handling this?
They're building what they call a guardrail layer, a local filtering system designed to catch AI errors before they're presented to you. Experts predict Apple will spend the next 18 months refining it.
So they're aware of the problem.
Very aware. But here's the thing. You can reduce hallucinations, but you can't eliminate them. There's a fundamental trade-off between capability and reliability. The more autonomous Siri becomes, the more opportunities for error.
So this could backfire?
If Siri 2.0 launches and immediately starts making embarrassing mistakes, the backlash will be severe. Apple's reputation is on the line. They've delayed this launch already. Originally, it was supposed to be 2025. They pushed to 2026 to get it right.
Do you think they've got it right?
We'll find out in March.
So Apple is paying Google $1 billion per year. Is this permanent, or is Apple planning to build their own capability eventually?
Apple is absolutely planning independence. This is a bridge, not a destination.
What's the timeline?
Apple is mass-producing their own AI server chips codenamed Baltra, expected in the second half of 2026.
Dedicated data centers are coming online in 2027. They announced a 4-year, $500 billion investment plan in U.S. manufacturing, part of which involves a Houston facility specifically for AI server production.
So by 2027, they could be off Google?
They could be reducing their dependence at least, but here's the catch. By 2027, Gemini will be even better, and users will expect even more from Siri. So Apple might build their own infrastructure, but they might still license Google's models, because Google stayed ahead.
So this could be a permanent relationship?
It could be, or it could evolve into something like the search deal. Apple pays Google to stay competitive year after year because the alternative is worse.
That's not great for Apple.
It's not ideal, but it's pragmatic. Apple tried to do everything themselves. It didn't work. Now they're adapting.
Okay, so we've talked about Apple, Google, strategy, infrastructure. What does this actually mean for someone with an iPhone?
In March or April, you'll get an iOS update. Siri will suddenly be much better. Faster responses, better context awareness, fewer mistakes. It'll feel like you got a new phone.
And the privacy piece.
Apple is maintaining their privacy architecture. Technically, your data shouldn't be exposed to Google any more than it was before, but you are trusting Google's AI to process your requests, even if the data stays in Apple's house.
Does that distinction matter to most people?
Probably not. Most people just want Siri to work. If it works and Apple says it's private, they'll be happy.
What about power users, privacy advocates?
They're conflicted. On one hand, Siri is finally getting good. On the other hand, Google's brain is inside Apple's ecosystem. Some will accept the trade-off. Others won't.
Is there a way to opt out?
Not that we've seen announced. If you use Siri in iOS 26.4 and later, you're using Gemini. That's the deal.
What about the September update with autonomous features?
That's where it gets interesting. If Siri starts acting on your behalf, rebooking flights, sending messages, making decisions, you need to trust it completely. And trusting an AI agent powered by Google running on Apple's infrastructure with access to your entire digital life, that's a big ask.
Will people do it?
Some will. Early adopters will try everything and give feedback. Most will try it cautiously and pull back if it screws up. The question is whether Apple can make it reliable enough that people trust it with progressively more important tasks.
So this is really a test of whether AI agents are ready for prime time.
At massive scale, yes. Google Assistant and Alexa have tried autonomous features, but they don't have access to your entire iOS ecosystem. Siri 2.0 will. If it works, it's transformative. If it doesn't, it's a disaster.
Jordan, this has been incredibly helpful and honestly kind of wild to think about.
It's a huge moment. Apple doesn't do partnerships like this. When they do, it means something fundamental has shifted.
For everyone listening, iOS 26.4 drops in late March, early April 2026. That's when the new Siri lands. If you're an iPhone user, your experience is about to change significantly. Whether that's good or bad depends on how well Apple and Google executed this partnership. The biggest story here is that Apple, the company that prides itself on vertical integration and doing everything in-house, just admitted they can't compete in AI alone. They need Google. And that dependency reshapes the power dynamics of the entire tech industry. If you want to understand these shifts as they happen, subscribe to the Read AI. We break down the tech stories that are actually changing the products you use. Share this episode with someone who's been waiting for Siri to get better, because their wait is almost over. Jordan, thanks for walking through this.
Thanks, Alex.
I'm Alex, this is the Read AI, and we'll catch you on the next one.